Hey church, today we are celebrating what God has done in the lives of those that have just completed Rooted. Twice a year here at South Hills, we offer something called Rooted. What is it? It's a 10-week journey that connects people with God, the church, and their purpose. It's a big step and a big deal for somebody to commit and complete the Rooted journey. Why? Because we know God moves and transforms us when we courageously step out and open more aspects of our lives to Him. Now, you may be one of our newer campuses where Rooted hasn't taken place yet, or simply you haven't been through Rooted yourself. Not to worry, it's coming around the corner in the new year. When registration opens, be sure to sign up. What I would love for all of us to do today is continue celebrating the work that God has done and is doing in our church family, just like it says in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 11. Therefore, encourage one another and build each other up, just as in fact you are doing. Congratulations to all of you who have gone through the Rooted process and completed it. It's a process that is not easy, but is extremely beneficial to your spiritual journey and your relationship with God. I want to encourage you one more time to continue to be a part of this if you haven't done so already.
I can quit whenever I want. I wouldn't even call my thing an addiction. It's just something I do. And it relaxes me. It's not like it's hurting anyone. Is it the best thing for me? Maybe not. But I can quit whenever I want.
All right, so we're in the holiday season, right, folks? You know, it feels like the holidays are here. Maybe it feels like the holidays have been here for you for the last 2 months. You know, Costco puts out all the holiday stuff in September. So whatever Costco does is, I guess, good with me. And so during the holiday season, I feel like it's my time to shine. Why? Because my number one love language is, guess it, gifts. Gifts. So holiday season, it is my time to shine. So if you know anything though about the love languages, it's not just about how you feel loved, but it's also how you express or give your love. So I really enjoy giving gifts to others. I actually enjoy the process. I'm very practical in my gift giving. I always want to give somebody that gift that's just really practical that I know that they're going to use, but here's the kicker, it's going to surprise them just a little bit. You know, I knew that they needed an apron, but I got you this one very particular cool apron, you know. And so this is how I like to give gifts. But there is a philosophy attached to the practicality, and that is this. If you don't like the gift, I'm genuinely not offended, you can exchange it. I'm not offended by that because why should you end up with something that you really don't want, right? Now, here's the problem. I believe in this philosophy in giving gifts to others. Well, go ahead. Just exchange it. No big deal. My feelings aren't hurt. Get what you want. This is about you. The problem has become I've adopted that philosophy for my own self as people give me gifts, right? So when I get a gift, I will shamelessly, keyword being shamelessly, I will shamelessly exchange that gift or get a store credit or in the best case scenario, cash, baby. Cash is king. So if I don't like the gift, I'm like, oh, just exchange it and maybe the person will find out or they won't find out. Now, I have learned the hard way that this offends people. Is anybody with me in like the practicality of like, I'll exchange gifts? No? Okay, perfect place for imperfect people. I guess really not. But I have had to learn the hard way that I get so fixated on getting the right thing, having the right thing for myself. You know, I'm very meticulous in the things that I want, and I like to cook a bit, so I'm very meticulous in like the cookware that I use, et cetera, that I've learned the hard way that this has actually damaged a little bit of my relationships, especially during this time. And I've offended some people along the way. And in essence, that's what we're talking about today. So the big idea of today's message, I'm just going to give it to you right off the bat. The big idea of today's message is the pursuit of our obsessions blinds us to the damage we're doing to others. And the Apostle Paul would write about this in one of his letters to the church. You find this in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 23. He writes this. So the church is saying this to him. I have the right to do anything. And Paul responds by saying, you say, so let me back up. I have the right to do anything, you say, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything. And he responds by saying, but not everything is constructive. No one should seek their own good, but the good of the other. See, the church in Corinth was reflective of a culture that was wealthy, but also knew how to party. The closest thing to it is like the really high-end area of Las Vegas. I'll let you guys use your wild imagination to fill in the gap from there of what the church of Corinth was like. And these folks, they really did live in the notion of freedom in Christ. And they took it a little bit too far. And so Paul is just essentially saying, in the most simplest of terms, just because you can does not mean that you should. Just because you can doesn't mean that you should, especially if it is not going to benefit others. And Paul's point is that centering your life around Jesus means that you're going to be paying attention to how you say things and how it's going to impact those around you. You cannot follow Jesus and at the very lowest level, you cannot follow Jesus and at the lowest level just be inconsiderate of others. And personally, this is why I actually have a really hard time when people say, oh, I love Jesus. I just don't love the church. You guys ever heard that before? I think I've said that before even too. Oh, I love Jesus. I just don't love the church. You know what that would be like saying? That would be like saying, Jeff, I love you so much, bro. I just really hate your wife. Or Jeff, I love you so much, man. You're so great. You're such a great person. You give the best gifts ever, but man, I cannot stand your kids to be around them. Right? You say that, I'm like, well, my response to you is, well, do you really love me? Because if you love me, then you have to love the things that I love. If you really do love me. And guess what, folks? Jesus loves his church. As messy as it is, and as screwed up as we can be, he loves people. And he loves his church. So you cannot follow Jesus and at the very least be inconsiderate of others. But why? Why? I'm so glad that you asked. Because in 1 John chapter 4, we see this, verse 19. We love because he first loved us. So if anyone says, I love God, and yet hates his brother or sister, he is a liar. Ouch. For the person who does not love his brother or sister whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. And we have this command from him. The one who loves God must also love his brother and sister. See, having a real love relationship, and also not just having a love relationship with Jesus, but then following him should cause us to move away from a self-centered life. When we follow Jesus, we don't turn inward, we look outward, and we see people the way God would see them. That they're worth it, that they're worth showing up for. See, the golden rule, I'm stealing this from Andy Stanley, he's so great. The golden rule says this, treat others the way you want to be, what? Ding, ding, ding. What about that platinum rule? Platinum rule says this. We all agree with this, but here's the platinum rule. Treat others the way Jesus would treat them. Do you think in those terms? Because I oftentimes will play and bet the farm on that golden rule. But Jesus is calling, if you're a follower of him, He calls you to more. He says, no, no, no. It's not good enough, Jeff, for you to just treat people how you want to be treated. I have to call you, and you now have to treat and love people the way that I would. That's what it means to follow me. And we're not perfect. In our inevitable sin nature, we recognize, back to the big idea, that the pursuit of our obsessions can blind us to the damage we're doing to others. I was also thinking about, what's another illustration of this? I'm like, oh, I know. I'm half Filipino. Anybody here Filipino? Oh, I'm in Idaho. Nobody here is Filipino. Does anybody know Filipino people, or do they not exist here? Okay, everybody knows them. Okay, so I'm half Filipino, and my Filipino side of the family, they're all like 4 foot nothing, and they're the hardcore Filipino folks. Like, it's not just like, oh, chicken adobo, we're gonna have that for dinner. It's like, oh, they're bringing out the balut. Do you guys know what balut is? Oh, it's weird. It's basically, I'm not going to go into it. It's kind of gross. But they eat like the really hardcore stuff, like balut and dinuguan. Dinuguan is a pork blood soup. And so if you ever been to like a Filipino Thanksgiving, it's really weird because it's like, oh, there's all the American stuff, and then there's all the weird Filipino stuff, right? So whenever you go to a Filipino dinner, if any of you guys have done this, or a Filipino meal, they are obsessed with feeding you, to the point where you will be incapacitated on the floor. And then when you're incapacitated on the floor, you know what they do? They kick you while you're down. And you hear this phrase over and over and over at my Filipino dinners. Kaya na, kaya na, kaya na. You know what kaya na means? You eat, you eat, you eat, right? And I'm like, I can't. This is my 6th plate. I can't, Grandma. I can't. Kaya na, look at how skinny you are. You're not da-da-da-da, right? And I'm just getting crushed. And at a certain point, I actually get kind of upset. I'm like, do you want to take me to the hospital? Your obsession with feeding me, and I know it's so generous, it's a cultural thing, but your obsession with feeding me is going to cause me to go to the ER and have to get my stomach pumped. Brutal, right? No more kaya na, right? We don't do that anymore. So your obsession has blinded you to the damage that you are causing to me. Oh, it's so easy to fall into this, folks. I want to look at a narrative of Jesus. It's going to be found in the New Testament. So if you have a Bible, you can use your Bible. If you want to look on the screens, we have it here. You can take some notes. But we're going to look at an interaction with Jesus and a guy named Zacchaeus, and may be familiar to you. So it's found in Luke 19. Starting in verse 1. So he, being Jesus, entered Jericho and was passing through. And there was a man called by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector, and he was rich. Zacchaeus was trying to see who Jesus was and was unable because of the crowd, for he was small in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed up the sycamore tree in order to see him, for he was about to pass through that way. Now, when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry, come down, for today I must stay at your house. And he hurried and he came down and he received him gladly. When they saw it, when it's saying they, it's talking about the crowd. When they saw it, they all began to grumble, saying, he has gone to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. Zacchaeus stopped and said to the Lord, behold, Lord, half of my possessions I will give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will give back 4 times as much. And Jesus said to him, today, salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man has come to seek and save which was lost. I want to pick this apart just a little bit. I want you guys to notice a few things, okay? So we're going to dissect this just a little bit. Number 1, Zacchaeus was a chief tax collector. We see this in verse 2. Some commentaries say that a chief tax collector is in charge of 1,000 tax collectors. Now, if you don't know anything about tax collectors during this day and age, oftentimes you'll hear in the scriptures, there's sinners and then there's tax collectors. Brutal. Why? Because tax collectors were hated and despised among the Jews, which Zacchaeus is one of them. because they were seen as betrayers to their own people. It's not that they just served Rome, but there was hardly any accountability with tax collectors. So often what a tax collector would do is that they would show up to your home, knock, knock, knock. Hey, we're here to collect the Roman tax. Give us X amount percentage. But what they would do is that they would tack on more that they would pocket from their own selves. So essentially, they weren't just betraying their own people on working on behalf of the Roman Empire, but they were also stealing from their own people. So this is why they were hated amongst their own people, the Jews. And so Zacchaeus was a chief tax collector. So he's noticed, and he's chosen a life that is obsessive in getting what he wants. You have to be a certain person to want to be a tax collector. Now, Zacchaeus was small and he climbed up a tree, so you see the urgency just to maybe even get a glimpse of Jesus. I kind of had this moment this last summer. I really started getting into country music, and I really like this band Midland. Anybody like this band Midland? No? Okay. My wife has the hots for the lead singer, and I said, well, I'm going to go meet him, and you're not, sucker. So I went, and I met Mark, and we were waiting, and he walked right by, and I was like, okay, that is a good-looking man. He's got like the scruffy facial hair. You know what I'm talking about, ladies? Like the scruffy facial hair, and he's like wearing like a tank top, and he's got the squinty eyes, all things I don't have. So anyway, so I was like, oh, I just want to get a glimpse of Mark, see what he really looks like in person, and my goodness, he's like 6'3" and buff and all this and that. So stuff I'm not. So I kind of relate to Zacchaeus. It's like it's that moment where somebody's coming. We need to see what they actually look like. We need to see what they're like, just to even get a glimpse, to say I was there. That's how he feels about Jesus. Now, in verse 5, notice this. Jesus emphatically invites himself over to Zacchaeus' house. This is really important. We can't miss this. We cannot miss this. So what Jesus is doing is making a statement to Zacchaeus and to the crowd. I must come to your house. Remember, Zacchaeus is openly hated among the crowd. So what is Jesus up to? Jesus is up to doing something that he does over and over and over and over again in the scriptures. And that is this. Jesus is a master of associating without condoning. Let me say that again. Jesus is a master at associating without condoning. We should have a slide for that. And I want to stop here just for a second, because this is the reason why people hated him. It wasn't just because he claimed to be God, but it's because he chose to spend his time with those people. Those people. And he's associating himself with them. But if you see in all of Jesus' interactions, he does not condone what they do. But he's always invited to associate with sinners and tax collectors. And I think if Jesus was here today, it's just my opinion, I think I'm right. If Jesus was here today, I think his strategy would be the same. I don't think he'd change his strategy that much. And a lot of us folks, we would say things like, it'd be so nice if Jesus was our pastor. I'd be so much more of a Christian if Jesus was our pastor. And you know what I think? You wouldn't like that. I wouldn't like that. Because here's what he would do. He would do two things that we see him do in the scriptures a lot. Number one, he's associating himself and hanging out, not with you, with all the people that you hate. That's what he would be doing. I don't think we would really like that much. So sometimes when we read these stories and we see the crowd like reacting in the way, I'm like, well, that would actually be me too. Number two, here's the other thing that he would do. He would talk about money all the time. All the time. In every sermon, he's preaching about money. I don't think we would like Jesus that much as our pastor, right? So these were the reasons why people were like, this guy, this is who you're hanging out with? And I think today, as Christians, we have to be careful. I get a little fired up on this. We have to be careful to look at the scriptures and to say, I would never respond like that. The crowd doing this. The crowd thinking like this. Jesus in that way. It's like, no. We would be very close to how they would respond. Because sometimes my friends who are way more Jesus-like than I am, when they're hanging out with people that I don't agree with, I'm like, why are you doing that? You know? You're going to be corrupted by them. But Jesus was a master at associating without condoning. Anyway, where was I? Oh, back to Zachary. So, verse 8. Verse 8, what does Zach do? He responds immediately and with a sense of urgency. And he responds in a tangible and specific way. By the way, if you notice this in verse 8, Zacchaeus stopped and said to the Lord, behold, Lord, half of my possessions I will give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will give back 4 times as much. If you really think about it, Zacchaeus is left with nothing if he's doing this. I mean, think about it. Go home, half your stuff gone. And anybody that you have wronged, you're paying that back 4 times as much. That is a hefty interest. He is left with nothing. And here's the truth, folks. Jesus becomes your everything when you have nothing. That is Zacchaeus' response. Jesus, you have to become my everything because I got nothing. That's it. And what is Jesus' purpose in all of this? Found in verse 10, to seek and save the lost. But once we're saved, you guys, once we're saved, specifically to Christians, I want to say this. Once you are saved, there are implications. Jesus is not simply in the business of saving you from something. He's in the business of saving you to something. You have work to do. It's time to get your hands dirty. I'm not just saving you from the gutter. I'm going to lift you up from the grave and send you somewhere. I'm going to send you on a path of reconciliation, of seeing people and loving people the way that I would. So, I want to remind us of the big idea again. The pursuit of our obsessions blinds us to the damage we're doing to others. But in following Jesus, here's my caveat, but in following Jesus, our personal obsessions fade and our desires become his desires. So how do we practically start doing that? I'm glad you asked that. We humble ourselves. How do we humble ourselves? Glad you asked that too. Let's get more practical. Here's a little action step for us. I want you to identify someone your behavior has negatively impacted. Tell them you're sorry and how you can make it right. James McDonald, I heard him say this in a talk. He said, when your heart misaligns with your actions, rush to correct it. Proverbs 18:19 says this, an offended friend, I love this verse, by the way. An offended friend is harder to win back than a fortified city. Arguments separate friends like a gate locked with bars. An offended brother is like a fortified city. Now, here's my disclaimer. It doesn't mean that you don't ever offend anybody. Clearly, Jesus offended people all the time. But here's my question to you. Are people getting offended because of your own selfishness? Or are they getting offended because you act like Jesus? I think people get offended with me because out of my own selfish desires, I just want what I want. So I'm going to take your gift and take it back and get cash. Or are people getting offended because you are acting and treating others like Jesus? That's okay. We can live with that. So why should we do all this? Other than the fact that Jesus tells us to. Even if Jesus is just saying, hey, you need to do this. Really, here's the question. What's in it for you? What's in it for us? I guess I'll do it because you're telling me to, but is there a benefit to it? What's in it for me? Jesus, I think you love me. How is this going to help me? Hebrews 12, verse 10 says this. They disciplined us for a while. They disciplined us for a little while as they thought best. But God disciplines us for our good, in order that we may share in his holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, here it comes. This is what's in it for you. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. What is in it for you? Peace and righteousness. That is what humbling yourself and discipline, that is the path it will lead you to. Peace and righteousness. You know, my very first ministry job, I was overly young to be working in this church, and I made a number of really stupid decisions that cost me my job, et cetera, et cetera. I won't go into the details. I made all these stupid decisions, and so part of then me getting let go from this church, I wanted to make things right. So I met with a guy who was way wiser than me and who had kind of walked this path years and years and years before me. And we would meet together. We'd meet together over a beer every single week. And finally, we get to this one week, and he says, okay, one of the things that I want you to do is I want you to meet with every single person you believe that you offended. Oh. And I want you to humble yourself to them and own it. And so I said, okay. And so I did it. And there was a number of people that were just, every single person I met with, just incredibly, incredibly gracious. And his whole thing was, when you meet with them, you own it. There was this one couple, though, that I knew that I had hurt, but in the messiness, in the process, and everything, they had really hurt me as well. They didn't show up. They just kind of pieced out of my life. They were just turds. And I don't know how else to say it. They were just not great. And I remember gearing up to meet them. And Brady, the guy that was walking me through everything, he reminded me, I'll just read what he said. He said, when you meet with them, this is about humbling yourself. You are not to expect anything in return. On top of that, in whatever ways that you feel like that they dropped the ball on you, in ways that they wronged you, you're not to bring it up. This is just a time for you to own your stuff and take it. Because I had a feeling that this meeting was hard just because I was already very hurt by them. So anyway, so I meet with them, and and it was awful. It was awful. I came before them. I said, I'm sorry for what happened. Sorry for this, sorry for that. And it was a solid hour meeting. And everything I said, they just laid into me more. And I just sat there being like, why am I doing this? This is so stupid. And I just got crushed and crushed and crushed and crushed. Everything I said. And it's just like, it just felt like that they were just there to like beat me up. Whereas like everybody that I met with, they just said, hey, we love you. Like, we love you. We see God working in you, right? And these folks just sucked. And they worked at the church too. So I was really disappointed in that. I really was. And the meeting ended really awkwardly. And that was it. Never really spoken to them since. Saw them here and there. But things were never the same or close or whatever. And not once in the entire time of me meeting with them, were they like, yeah, hey, we're sorry too. We didn't show up. And that was brutal. And it was hard. And even thinking back this last week, I'll be really transparent with you guys. Even thinking back this last week, this was like the story that kept coming up. And I was like, God, this is like kind of painful for me to revisit and share. But Didn't have a happy ending, but on the other side of it, I knew a few things. I knew that God was with me, and I know that he is. And I'm not saying that I'm like holier than thou or anything like that, or that I have anything figured out, but also like I knew that I did the right thing, regardless of the outcome. And so it was really, and so Brady helped me walk through that. I couldn't do that alone, but Brady helped me walk through it. But this is like one of these things where I was like, okay, it's time to just humble myself. I was the one that did all the initial wrong anyway. So for you, maybe you need to do that. So here's some practical steps on how to do it. Here to take anything away. Number one, here's what I want you to do. If you feel like you have offended anybody, or if you feel like that there's some sort of gap in the relationship, or the relationship has kind of drifted or anything like that, if you feel like that there's some sort of animosity between you, a coworker, a friend, whatever, somebody in this church, number one, I want you to be immediate, just like Zacchaeus. I'm responding quickly. Be immediate. And the question I ask is, am I closing the gap? When I say the gap, it's the gap of time, the gap of just life happening. Close that gap. Be immediate. Is there any way that I wronged you? So number two, be specific. Am I owning it? General apologies are not great, folks. Be specific. I'm really, really, really sorry for the way that I let you down on this day when I did this. It's just a way for me to own it. Number three, be humble. Here's the question I like to ask. Are there strings attached? And this is what Brady was trying to instill in me when I would meet with this couple. Jeff, you cannot go into this meeting with them with strings attached. So you're not apologizing so you can get something in return. By the way, this is a great way to love, folks. Love with no strings attached. Because if you're loving with strings attached, that's called manipulation. Number four, last one, be interested. Genuinely be interested. When you get done with your apology tour and humbling yourself, and again, this isn't about like, oh, I'm sorry, oh, I'm sorry, oh, I'm sorry, oh, I'm sorry. It's not, you guys know what I'm saying. So don't mishear me. But be interested. At the end of it, say, is there anything that I missed? Is there anything else that you need to say to me that I haven't heard that I need to hear? And do that. This is the way that we can take practical steps to act and be more like Christ. Because Jesus modeled this. And then what did he say? Love your enemies. Love your enemies. Turn the other cheek. Bless those who persecute you. How are we doing in that? I'm probably doing like a 3 out of 10 on that, if I'm honest. I got a ways to go. Let's pray. God, we're grateful for you. Thank you for who you are. Thank you in the way that you saw Zacchaeus, you see us. We're not perfect. We don't have it all together, but I know a lot of us want to take steps in that direction. Not to just be better people, because I know that that's kind of just, that's an impossible bar. It's not about reaching perfection, but it's about being on the faith journey with you. So I just pray that you would increase our faith to be able to do it, that you would give us courage to be able to submit, to be able to be humble, to be able to just own our stuff, not for the sake of our own agenda, but it's because it's a way that we can bring peace in ourselves. It's a way that we could bring your love and your hope into the world. So continue to fill us and have us be a courageous people group, a courageous church.
South Hills Church, I just want to take a moment and say thank you for watching our service online. Whether you're watching it for the first time or you're watching it again because you enjoyed the service so much from the weekend, I'd like to take a moment and dive into our giving. Every week we give people the opportunity to give back and give to the local church so that God can continue to bless your lives and bless your finances. Here at South Hills, we believe that everything comes from God. We believe that He's the one that chose us and brought us into this world, gave us our gifts and talents and abilities. And I just want you to know that when we give, we are giving back what God has already given to us. If you've ever seen any of our envelopes at a South Hills campus, you'll see on there that it says, every week at South Hills, your generosity is giving people the opportunity to live a better story. And there's a scripture on there in Matthew chapter 6, verse 21 that says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So I want to encourage you today to click down below and set up your giving, whether it's for the first time or whether you're doing reoccurring giving. We have 4 ways to give here at South Hills. 1, you can do it in person at any of our campuses through an envelope. Or 2, you can actually text any amount that you would like to 84321. And the 3rd way is to download our Church Center app. I encourage you to do this one because the Church Center app gives you opportunity to stay connected with our church and your campuses. It's a great tool and resource for you to know what's going on. And the 4th way to give is to give online. You can go to southhills.org/give and you can set up your giving there. Whether you're a guest of our church or whether you are a member of our church, or whether you simply just like to watch our services, I encourage you to trust God with your finances so that He can bless and anoint your finances, and you can be trusting God in this journey of living life to the fullest. I love you, and thank you for watching our online service today.